Hello and welcome to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. This week on the show, a two-part look at the power of Ukrainian civil society. Part 1, the generational conflict which toppled a general. Part 2, active citizenship, how war is shaping Ukrainians' relationship with the state. Those stories, plus a look at a US surrogacy scandal, which has forced one of Germany's most powerful politicians to resign.
This announcement of this baby came out, and I don't know, I think Spahn imagined that he could get away with this.
That's all coming up here on Inside Europe. Ukraine lost a general this week. No, not on the battlefield. The general in question is still very much alive, just no longer in post. On Wednesday, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky announced the departure of Ukraine's Commander-in-Chief, Oleksandr Syrsky. Syrsky's departure had been the central demand of protests which sprang up in Kyiv and other places around the country in response to an earlier sacking, that of the popular and innovative young Minister of Defence, Mikhailo Fedorov. In post for just 6 months, the 35-year-old Fedorov had been widely praised for energising the ministry and transforming the armed forces, as well as leading a drive against corruption. But when I spoke to DW's Kyiv correspondent, Nick Connolly, on Wednesday, he told me that the unprecedented response to Fedorov's sacking went far beyond simple questions of popularity.
I think the thing about Fedorov is that yes, he was very successful. Yes, he was very well liked in the West and among Ukraine's friends, and he got a lot of very positive feedback in a very short amount of time. But I think the kind of bigger picture, if you step back, is that it really felt that he was one of the few people who could articulate a positive vision of how Ukraine ends this war on its terms, how it really imposes a price for this war on Russia. And it really felt like, for many people here, that was the first time they'd heard that vision for years, that basically from people like Syrsky, but even from Zelensky, they're just hearing calls to keep on going, to stick it out, to stay in the trenches, as it were, and hope they can kind of outlast the Russians without any real explanation of how that's going to work. So that's, I think, why he had so much support from the population, from people online, but also on the streets of Kyiv. And there was a sense also, if you looked at all the attacks on Russia and the burning oil refineries and logistics centers in Russia, that Ukraine was also turning a corner, that this wasn't just about a vision, that it was actually having a practical effect. And so I think that kind of took people by surprise the most, the fact that just as things seemingly were going in Ukraine's direction, suddenly this guy loses his job, and it wasn't properly explained by Zelensky, except with kind of some hints to the effect that he and Syrsky hadn't got on.
So in effect, it seemed that Zelensky had believed himself to be faced between a choice between Syrsky or Fedorov. What, in terms of what those two men represent, did that choice constitute?
I think it's definitely a choice between the kind of conservative status quo and something pretty new, right? In terms of challenging the status quo, challenging the way money is spent, right? Lots of people on the streets were convinced this was also about corruption, that Fedorov was challenging the companies that had grown used to getting government contracts and maybe not producing the kind of weapons that the army needed or at the quality promised. So there was that aspect. And I think there's also a generational aspect, right? You had reports that Syrsky and his retinue, that they were angry at not enough money, they claim, being spent on artillery, that they thought Fedorov was just putting all the money into drones while neglecting artillery that still has its role on the front lines. The longer this goes on, there's increasing speculation here that there was also just worry among Zelensky's team that Fedorov was becoming too independent, too popular, and might at some stage present a kind of political challenge, and might become an independent political figure, even though he hadn't done anything to suggest that while he was in office. The fact that people were willingly coming out in favor of a minister to protect him, to protect his kind of vision of what needs to change in this country, that is basically new. When you look at how many people were gathering on the streets, not just in Kyiv but in other cities, but also, for instance, the live stream of Fedorov's press conference after his sacking, where he was pretty open by Ukrainian standards in his criticism of basically everyone except Zelensky, that has now picked up over 1 million clicks for something that is an extended political press conference. That is not a normal situation, right? That shows you quite how deep that support is for him.
You talked about generational conflict, Nick. So, I mean, to sort of put that in caricature-esque brushstrokes, you would have the Soviet-era boomer General Zyrski. You would have Fedorov, who at 35 would be millennial, Zelensky sort of in the middle and deciding which way to jump. But in terms of the protesters, where would you place them?
I mean, certainly if you look at the pictures, there are lots of young people, and they were definitely overrepresented at the beginning of the protest, right? Kind of early on, let's say 5 p.m. If the start is at 8, then up till about 7:30, it was a very young average age, and then kind of things balanced out a bit. I think it's also important to say that obviously lots of Ukrainian men, say in their later 20s and 30s, are either fighting or they're hanging out at home because they don't want to be recruited to the military. You then had people in the military officially, on camera giving back their medals or, saying things about Sirski that they didn't, weren't willing to follow his lead or didn't agree with his tactics. So I think it's a generational thing, certainly to an extent, but it's also just, there's a kind of broader coalition of people who just feel like Zelensky has not chosen reform at crucial junctures, has been influenced by the people around him who want more of the same. We had the same thing last year with the protests about the independence of Ukraine's anti-corruption institutions and the attempted withdrawal of their independence to make them more convenient and less dangerous to people in politics.
Okay, so we really have seen Ukrainian civil society flex its muscles this week, and the gains are quite considerable. Where, as of Wednesday, are we in terms of what we know about who is in which job?
Well, Sirski's gone. That's the major takeaway. He's been replaced by Michal Drapati, who is someone who is a generation younger, who is in his early 40s, who basically came to prominence by kind of very famous bit of user-generated video from Mariupol in 2014, where pro-Russian separatists decided to put up a barricade, and he just drove through it in an armored vehicle. So that's kind of the kind of folklore of his kind of military background, and he's someone who's seen as basically on the same page as Fedorov in terms of modernization, in terms of fighting more cleverly rather than just more aggressively or more riskily. In terms of the defense minister, well, it's still only talk of Khmara, who is Yevgeny Khmara, who's a highly decorated soldier, kind of special forces soldier, who has been in charge of Ukraine's domestic intelligence service, the SBU, albeit as an acting minister. And there is worry here that he's being used, his reputation is being used as kind of sop to public opinion, but that actually, in practice, he might not have full control, that he may be left as an acting minister, for instance. As for Fedorov's future, we've heard various reports of offers being made to him by Zelensky to be an advisor or some kind of Miltech czar, none of which have the same power or budget as defense minister. And there was a story just now that Fedorov has refused to take any job except his old job back, which obviously sets him up for a conflict with Zelensky. We don't know what the future holds for him, but it really seems like Zelensky has turned Fedorov from a kind of loyal minister, which he was, to, one of the few people who'd stayed in cabinet since the very beginning, since 2019. And he's now basically created a kind of political backstory for Fedorov and made him even more popular with, let's say, the kind of liberal big city votership who were already pretty skeptical about Zelensky.
So, Fedorov, a name we will be hearing more from in the future, it sounds like. Nick Connolly, thank you so much for talking to me.
Always a pleasure, Kate.
Concerning though the sacking of Ukraine's popular young defence minister may have been, Ukrainian civil society once again demonstrated its power this week and its determination to hold those in charge to account. The fact that thousands of predominantly young people kept turning out to protest, despite Kyiv suffering one of its most intensive periods of nighttime bombardment to date, is testament to a deeply held sense of active, participatory citizenship. It's a phenomenon which the Ukrainian journalist Natalia Humenyuk explores in a long-form contribution to the Dial's How We See It collection. More on that collection later. But for now, here is Natalia in her own words.
My life is definitely better than the life of my parents. It's paradoxical. They didn't live through war. But I kind of feel more solid. And very recently, I was in the theater play, and there was this interview with a Ukrainian girl, and the mother says, like, what is the future of Ukraine? And she says, like, with no kind of consideration, definitely it will be better.
It's a generational confidence that has its roots in recent lived history. In 2014, Ukrainians took to the streets in articulation of a vision of a Europe-facing, open, democratic Ukraine, and won.
The government Ukrainians chosen in 2014 was finally the government we have chosen. So you can say it's ours.
And this feeling of collective ownership is, Natalia Humaniuk believes, a crucial factor in Ukrainians' decision to resist Russia's 2022 invasion, whatever the cost.
If the threat is so immense, like when the big foreign country is really calling for your extermination, it's probably the state which can protect you. I'm speaking about the army, I'm speaking about the hospitals, I'm speaking about, water supply, electricity supply, railway. Fire services, obviously, that was also a bit of the evolution to understand that there are some things where the state, connects us, and then it can create this something which we call the social good. We need that state because we feel that, like, we need to help this state to be capable, so it will protect us.
In other words, Natalia Humaniuk believes that Ukrainians are experiencing firsthand and on a visceral level the true meaning of citizenship, of a mutual, independent, active relationship between state and citizen. It's an experience which, in her essay for the Dial's How We See It collection, she contrasts with the observations she made during her time covering US elections as a foreign correspondent in the United States.
I think the most fascinating thing for me was when I had a chance to be in the US, traveling through a number of the different type of the states, Georgia, Texas, out of the West Coast. But in any case, what for me was a bit surprising that we were talking to a lot of people from the American philanthropy, and they were always saying, like, and there is this, and we provide this service, very proud. And I didn't really understand why a private organization should care about women's shelters, and if this organization is not there, this shelter won't be there. And then it became clear that those extreme things would be treated by mainly goodwill of some of the philanthropists. So, like, I'll support shelters, supporting women who are trying to hide from domestic violence. And if you like animals, I'll care about the animals, but I don't care about that type of the community. So in my state, I wouldn't do anything for them. And that was kind of something which was quite a surprise.
It is not, Natalia Humaniuk was keen to stress to me, that she is anti-American or that she sees everything in America as being broken. And it's certainly not that she is arguing that Ukraine is perfect. On the contrary, she says, the sense of a functioning state is an incredibly recent development for Ukraine. But maybe that's exactly why the rest of the world might just have something to learn.
Ukrainians also used to steal from their state, use their state, don't care about the state, don't hope nothing from the state. We always were speaking a lot what citizens should do, that not the country should do something for you, you need to do that. But when you now talk to people, like 80% of the Ukrainians had donated for anything connected to the war effort, like 80%, maybe even more. And it's a poor country, it's not a rich country. Then you can also say that with a full-scale invasion, a person was volunteering in its village, help its neighbors, there were various kind of experiences of the solidarity, hosting relatives, friends, wherever, and in the end, going to serve in the army, whether it would be, you yourself, your son, your brother, if you are a woman, your husband or father. And this gives you a very strong feeling of agency. Like, I did something for the state. And I felt this from talking to a lot of people from the villages. You practice your citizenship. You do not just give it away, by paying taxes or voting once in a while, but you practice your citizenship. So you really believe that then you influence on a lot of other processes. And it starts from the local level. And with that, you kind of think that you own this state. Therefore, this state should do this or that. because you have this fortunate and unfortunate level of interdependency. As well, the state knows it cannot fight the war without its people. It will collapse.
And it's not just people's relationships to the state that are important, Natalia Humaniuk says. It's the web of everyday interactions that keep people feeling as though everybody's in it together, whether that's civilians in a communal bomb shelter or soldiers at the front.
The war forces a lot of Ukrainians to stay together physically, and it gives a very unexpected level of interaction, which possibly also a bit preserve us from living in a very mythical world. You can imagine anything about Russia, you can imagine anything, but in the end, you kind of know who bombs you because that people bombs you. It's, like you can't hide from that. It's not the reality you can hide. And that's partially possibly help as well.
Natalia Humaniuk is CEO of the Public Interest Journalism Lab. She's also the only Ukrainian journalist to have covered every US election as a foreign correspondent since Barack Obama's 2008 campaign. You will find her long-form reflection on the differences between Ukrainian and US lived experiences of citizenship in How We See It, a collection of 12 essays from journalists around the world, each offering a unique insight into how the USA is seen from abroad. How We See It is out now from New Press with an introduction by Madeleine Schwartz, editor-in-chief of The Dial magazine. And for what it's worth, I have actually read all 12 essays. One of my favourites is the Italian contribution, which takes place in a packed gelateria. And How We See It is definitely right up at the top of my personal summer reading picks list. Back in a minute. German politician Jens Spahn and his husband have welcomed a baby into the world. Why is that newsworthy? Well, because the baby was born to a US surrogate mother, surrogacy being illegal in Germany. And as the parliamentary leader of the CDU, Chancellor Merz's governing Christian Democrat Party, which has consistently voted against legalising surrogacy, that wasn't exactly a good look. So, within days of the announcement, Jens Spahn was forced to resign. Here's how DW News reporter Julia Zardelli explained the case to Inside Europe's producer Laura Kabelka.
A lot of accusations of hypocrisy started emerging, a lot of people criticizing Spahn and saying that he had used a service privately for himself, which is not allowed in his own country and which he himself is against. There had been statements in the past coming from Jens Spahn himself, where he said that he could not imagine using, quote unquote, a rented womb to get a baby. His own party, the Christian Democratic Union, has recently again said that they are against making surrogacy legal in Germany. So this caused a very big uproar. A lot of politicians started calling for Spahn to resign from his role as leader of the parliamentary group of his party. And reportedly, Chancellor Friedrich Merz himself asked for Spahn to take a step back.
To understand how big of a deal this is, I asked Julia Saudelli to explain who we are talking about here.
So Jens Spahn is quite a prominent politician in his party, in the conservative group within the parliament, and he has been a long-time politician. He is in his 40s, but he's been in the Bundestag for over 20 years. In the last government of Chancellor Angela Merkel, he was health minister during the COVID-19 pandemic. After that, now that the Conservatives are back in government, he became the parliamentary group leader, and that is a very relevant role in the party. He basically tries to build up support and voting for measures that the government wants to approve. But he is also a bit of a controversial figure. He is very outspoken. He is a member of the more right-wing leaning part of the CDU party. He has called for stricter measures on immigration. He has sometimes hinted to the fact that it might be a good idea for his party to consider maybe working together with the far-right AfD party. There are also already a few scandals or reasons for criticism that happened for Spahn. For example, when he was health minister, there was a procurement scandal in his ministry where COVID-19 masks were bought for very high prices and from a company where the minister's husband used to work. So that was, a cause for a big debate in Germany. And it is quite well known that Friedrich Merz, the chancellor, and Jens Spahn don't necessarily get along that well, that Jens Spahn isn't necessarily that loyal to the chancellor.
Chancellor Merz said Spahn's resignation was the right thing to do and inevitable, emphasizing the importance of credibility in politics. This credibility issue is also what Giulia Saudelli believes to have made this case more consequential.
Other criticism or accusations that came before, I think, didn't necessarily imply that Spahn was going against any of the party's moral stances or of the party's moral principles. I'm a little surprised about how he dealt with the whole issue because this announcement of this baby came out and I don't know, I think Spahn imagined that he could get away with this because he didn't say anything beforehand. He didn't say that he changed his mind about surrogacy.
Whether he wanted to or not, Jens Spahn definitely managed to breathe new life into the whole surrogacy debate in Germany. For now, Spahn is still a regular member of parliament.
You know, Jens Spahn has notoriously ambitions to become chancellor at some point. So we'll have to see whether this hit to his credibility is going to last in the longer term.
And what about the impact of all this on the governing coalition, which consists of the Conservative Alliance plus the Social Democrats?
The coalition, despite many disagreements and many issues in finding a common position on many topics, they're really trying to show unity. It's important because the coalition isn't doing well in the polls at all. Their support among the public is at record lows. So obviously, they're trying to let this thing that happened with Spahn not make their approval ratings even worse. And they're trying to really show a united front on this.
That united front, though, it may have generational limits. The head of the Socialists' youth wing, Philipp Thürmer, reacted to the news of Spahn's departure by pouring himself a celebratory glass of beer on Instagram. The beer was in German, but the Schadenfreude, that most definitely was.
Laura Kaberka signing off for us there. For those wanting to learn more about all things Spahn surrogacy related, we will be linking to Giulia Saudelli's video explainer in the show notes. Still to come, how European universities are cashing in on the US's academic exodus. If you're listening via a partner station, which leaves us here, you will find that story and much more besides wherever you get your podcasts. That's on Inside Europe with me, Kate Laycock. Welcome back to Inside Europe, the weekly current affairs podcast and radio programme from DW, Germany's international broadcaster. I'm Kate Laycock in Bonn. Coming up this next half hour, the military uses of pigeons. Plus, the musicians haunted by their own AI doppelgangers. First, though, it's summer, the long vacations are ahead, and school's out till September. When the new academic term begins, there are likely to be some new faces and some new accents gracing the halls of European academia. American faces and American accents. Yes, the US brain drain is real, as reporter Anna Pujol-Mazzini has been finding out from France.
Kartik Sheth used to have one of the top jobs in science at NASA.
I, for the last 10 years, was in the government. So I was at NASA headquarters since 2015, and I came back to NASA as NASA's Associate Chief Scientist.
After 15 years working for the institution, Sheth wasn't particularly worried about job security. But then,
I was actually in California at the launch for Surrogacy. And that Friday, the chief scientist, Kate Calvin, wrote me an email and she said, Kartik, I remember you said you had somebody coming to the office next week, a student. Are they still coming? I said, yes, she's going to be there. And Kate wrote back and said, no, she should not be here. And it was a very strange email to get on a Friday evening. And a colleague of mine who works at the White House told me, I think that's a good idea. I don't think you should have the student there. So I was like, all right, we're probably getting laid off.
On March 10th, 2025, Kartik Sheth's entire office was eliminated by the Trump administration. It was the first few weeks of the second Trump mandate, and thousands of federal workers were being laid off.
Now, my student was still there. So I went in, I met with her, and I told her, I said, hey, you get to be at the front row of history being made, as we're the first people to get rift from the government.
Sheth was a federal worker. He's also an astrophysicist.
I would say most of my career has been spent on trying to understand how galaxies like the Milky Way first formed and how they came to be today.
But here on Earth, political development started to impact his work and the work of many other academics.
We're also going to stand up to the radical left communists, Marxists, fascists, and frauds who have taken over our universities.
The Department of Education says it's now investigating 60 colleges and universities over anti-Semitism claims.
Some more breaking news from the White House. The Trump administration making good on its threat to cancel $400 million in federal grants to Columbia University.
Sheth grew up in Mumbai. He and his family moved to the US when he was 14.
It was the first time in 40 years I did not have a job. And having grown up very poor and always worked since the day I came to the US, it was a strange feeling to go, okay, what do I do now that I'm in my 50s?
While he was figuring out his next move, on the other side of the Atlantic, Éric Berton, the president of Aix-Marseille University, was ready to take action.
I was shocked by the sheer violence of what was happening in the United States. So in March 2025, I decided to create the Safe Place for Science program to welcome researchers from American laboratories whose academic freedom was being restricted by the Trump administration.
The institution was one of the first in the world to welcome US researchers who wanted to leave the country. Berton thought he would only get a handful of applications from early career researchers.
We were overwhelmed by the response. We received 300 applications in just 3 weeks. And after the call for applications had officially closed, another 300 came in. In fact, we're still receiving applications today.
Many applications came from senior researchers at places like MIT, Stanford, and, like Kartik Sheth, NASA.
It was August or September of last year where they wrote me a letter saying, you've been selected.
Éric Berton sees Sheth's trajectory as a reversal of history.
That's what happened in Europe in the 1930s and 1940s. And that's what's happening in the US today. When an authoritarian regime starts restricting freedoms, one of the first things to come under attack is science. Authoritarian governments tend to want to control what's being said in lecture halls. They want to rewrite history. They want to rewrite geography.
Many other institutions, in Europe and around the world, have followed. In May last year, French President Emmanuel Macron and European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen hosted a conference at La Sorbonne University to attract US researchers to Europe and launched the Choose Europe for Science program.
Science is an investment, and we need to offer the right incentives. This is why I can announce that we will put forward a new 500 million euro package for 2025 to 2027 to make Europe a magnet for researchers.
Other universities in France and Belgium have launched similar initiatives. Germany and the Netherlands have rolled out programs to try and attract top international researchers, while hinting at the situation in the US. Now, the 30 successful candidates of Aix-Marseille University are starting to arrive in the city. Sheth landed in Marseille in June, and he'll be going back and forth between France and the US. Some of his colleagues have already moved full-time.
My name is Pete Foulet, and I am a forest ecologist and have spent most of my career with the School of Forestry at Northern Arizona University.
Peter Foulet is a fire ecologist.
With fire ecologists, what we're trying to do is understand that big picture role of fire and its characteristics.
Peter and his wife moved to Marseille a few months ago for the opportunity to work in the Mediterranean, but also because
one of the issues of concern with the current U.S. administration is their insistence on leaving climate change out of scientific activities, which is really impossible because human-caused warming climate is the main driver of major changes in all sorts of aspects of ecosystems, including forest fires.
He also worked in close collaboration with many federal agencies and offices that have seen cuts and limitations on what they're allowed to say.
There has been a major reduction in federal funding in the United States for many aspects of science, including work related to climate change, also to diversity. As you know, through the administration's focus on avoiding that term, I have over 30 years of a professional career in the U.S., and this is the first time that my colleagues and I have been challenged with a question like that. I have a hard time recognizing the country that I was born in and grew up in and worked in, and that is a painful experience, but at present it's the way that it is.
But while many have applauded European schools for attracting top US scientific talent, some have raised concerns. Several French researchers have questioned the decision to unlock huge pockets of funding for international researchers when their domestic counterparts are struggling to get their projects funded. Kartik Sheth's own colleagues have expressed criticism.
And so for me, from the very beginning, even before I was made the offer, I grappled with how do I justify this to make sure that I'm not viewed as somebody who's extractive, somebody who's going to, at the end of the day, contribute to Marseille and contribute to France.
In Marseille, most of the researchers will arrive in September, a few months before presidential elections in France next year. Current polls show the far-right National Rally leading in the first round. French universities have warned that some of the party's proposals could undermine academic freedom and the country's ability to attract international researchers.
I know that there are elections next year. I don't know what will happen. I don't even know if these programs will continue, to be honest, a year from now.
Through all these changes, Sheth remains hopeful.
If I get really depressed or I'm feeling down about something, I think about an interview by James Baldwin. And at that time in the late 1960s, early 70s, Black men were being killed, as the struggle for civil rights was going on.
The interviewer asks Baldwin, "Are you an optimist?"
And he thinks about it for a moment and he says,
I can't be a pessimist because I'm alive. To be a pessimist means that you have agreed that human life is an academic matter. So I'm forced to be an optimist.
Anna Pujol-Mezzini for DW in Paris.
We're going to stay in France for the moment because we have a quirky curveball of a story for you. France, it turns out, or to be more precise, the French Army's 8th Signal Regiment, is breeding the continent's last military carrier pigeons. Yes, pigeons, or as they say in French, les pigeons. Don't worry, as far as we can tell, Europe's rearmament drive does not currently have birds on its procurement wish list. But perhaps we shouldn't be so dismissive. After all, carrier pigeons did play key roles during both the First and Second World Wars. Lisa Bryant has been visiting the flock.
Perched on a hill overlooking the French capital, Mont Valérien Fort has just welcomed its latest feathered resident. Though so far there's only a bit of yellow fluff on the scrawny day-old squab, or squeaker, as pigeon chicks are called. Its sibling is expected to hatch tomorrow.
They weigh about 12 grams, and tomorrow they'll weigh 25 grams. That's more than double today's weight.
That's Sylvain, caretaker, coach, nurse, and dad of sorts for the 8th Signal Regiment's flock of roughly 200 carrier pigeons, Europe's last army pigeons. He's a former sergeant, now a civilian, at the fort where the regiment is based. Per army rules, his last name isn't being used.
They've known me since they were born. I'm the one that feeds them. They recognize my voice, my smell. When they're sick, they'll seek me out.
Carrier pigeons have a long and illustrious military and civilian history, some of it documented at the fort's tiny carrier pigeon museum that Sylvain also oversees.
Carrier pigeons began to be used 2,000 years before Jesus Christ. We've seen tablets in what is today's Syria showing a race between a horse and a pigeon to transmit the same message to the same destination. It took the horse 3 weeks and the pigeon 3 days.
Back in the Middle Ages, they were prized in France, but not for sending messages. Instead, they were bred for dinner plates. Pigeon meat was considered refined, and their droppings were used as fertilizer.
In the 16th century, they were used by pirates hunting for potential targets. Pirates sent their sailors and pigeons out at sea. When the sailors spotted targets, they'd release the pigeons to return to the main ship with messages.
Carrier pigeons navigate using magnetic sensors in their bodies, but this only works one way.
Pigeons only know how to return home. I can't tell one to go to Berlin. He wouldn't go. But I could take him to Berlin, and he'd come back here.
Only during the 19th century Franco-Prussian War did French pigeons assume a military role.
Paris was under siege. Parisians needed to transmit messages by air. They tried balloons, but they kept crashing. So they turned to pigeons.
Then came the 2 world wars. Pigeons earned fame and honor for their valor. At Mont Valérien's museum, there's a photo of a rust-colored German army pigeon called Kaiser, who served during both world wars. Captured by U.S. forces in 1918, he may have been the longest-serving pigeon prisoner of war, dying at an army fort in New Jersey at the ripe old age of 32.
That pigeon became a breeder for the US Army. He sired 75 offspring with his partner, Lady Bell.
One of France's most decorated heroes is a World War I pigeon called Vaillant, or Valiant. It was dispatched from Fort de Vaux in northeastern France as it was attacked by the Germans during the Battle of Verdun. Sylvain reads a message the pigeon carried.
We're still holding, but we're under attack by gas and other dangerous fumes. We need to get out immediately. This is my last pigeon.
Vaillant survived toxic fumes and enemy fire to safely transmit his missive. He was later awarded for bravery. Pigeons were also used during World War II, including to dispatch Reuters' D-Day news, and during Algeria's War of Independence from France. France's military flocks retired from active duty in the 1960s, a trend seen elsewhere as more modern, non-feathered communication gained ground. But the 8th Signal Regiment still keeps them for civilian use.
Mont Valérien's dovecot is more for tradition.
A former drone operator, Sylvain has been working with Mont Valérien's pigeons for years.
My grandfather used to raise pigeons in northern France. I held my first pigeon when I was about 8 or 9. When I was transferred to the Paris area, I heard there was a military dovecot looking for someone. I applied and was accepted.
Sylvain trains the pigeons for national races, both sprints and marathons, fortifying them with power-packed grains. They have an hour or so of daily flying while he cleans out their cages, and weekly 60-kilometer so-called pigeon jogs.
I'm their sports coach, a bit like the French football manager Didier Deschamps, but for military pigeons. I select and train them.
He's also their champion.
It's unfair, this reputation of being a rat with wings. Pigeons are very clean and very intelligent.
He shows the sprinters with their muscle-packed bodies and the leaner so-called marathoners able to fly hundreds of kilometers. There are also white pigeons with fan-like tails and others with curvy necks that are saved for special ceremonies. Sylvain has a favorite, pigeon number 737, a marathoner who's won several awards. Like the others, it's got a ring on one leg with its address and date of birth. He's glad Mont Valérien is keeping old traditions.
It's important to know where we're going and where we came from.
And if France's military ever needs carrier pigeons again, he says, his flock is ready to serve. Lisa Bryant, DW, Suresnes, France.
From the old to the new next, we're about to ask, did AI just steal my Spotify? That's here on Inside Europe. Picture this. You're a serious musician, working hard to create art and make a living. Suddenly, on your music streaming profile, a new album appears. In your name. It's not you. In fact, it's nothing like you at all. It's AI generated, and you can't get rid of it. Well, that is exactly what is happening to an increasing number of artists. Lars Bavanger met up with one of them in Oslo.
This is a track by and with bass player and composer Mats Eilertsen from his 2019 album Reveries and Revelations. He's released 13 solo albums and appeared on more than 100 releases, and is considered one of Europe's top jazz performers. But earlier this year, one new album release by Mats Eilertsen was not quite what it purported to be.
Somebody who listens to my music contacted me and said there's a new album from you out. He found it on Tidal, but also could tell me it was on Spotify.
This was not Mats.
When you go to the places we used to go.
The album was posted under his name, on his profile, but it was AI-generated soft rock with a cliched album cover. The process of uploading a track to a streaming service is fully automated. Giving an AI product the exact same name as an established artist increases the chance that the AI music ends up on that artist's profile. In Mats Eilertsen's case, it meant the AI creator instantly got access to the real Mats' thousands of fans.
I didn't feel angry or sad. I was just frustrated that this happened to me and we have come to this point.
AI-generated music is growing rapidly. The French streaming platform Deezer is so far the only major streaming service actively labelling such music, and they say that AI-generated tracks now represent nearly half of all new music uploaded to their platform. A lot of this is not listened to, but the scale and growth of the phenomenon is worrying many musicians.
When AI music came, it was more like, this sounds a bit generic, boring, flat. And we're seeing it become better and better.
Torstein Sloen is a guitarist and a representative from the Norwegian Artists Initiative for the Regulation of Artificial Intelligence. Bass player Mats Eilertsen is not the only Norwegian artist having had their name and profile taken over by AI, he tells me.
It is, for instance, Tor Gustavsen. There's Matthias Eik. I think Jacob Young has been exposed for this kind of fraud.
So why do you think these AI copies don't go for the bigger artists, like the internationally hugely successful ones like Taylor Swift or someone like Justin Bieber?
I think there might be two reasons for that. One is because they have the power to sue. Also because big record companies, which already has big deals with AI companies. So they have this kind of AI agreement already. So we who are not protected by this is more exposed and don't also have the economic capacity to go against this kind of forces.
I thought it was fairly easy to get rid of this music. Apparently there are some forms that you can use to say that this music is not yours.
Mats Eilertsen contacted the streaming platforms where his profile had been misused and managed to get rid of it in most instances. On Spotify, however, the AI version of Mats remains, but now under its own profile. Away from Mats's original discography, Spotify declined an interview for this piece but sent this answer to my question of why the fake Mats Eilertsen is still allowed to exist on their platform. I quote, "Artists have shared the same or similar names for decades, long before AI was part of the picture. Ownership of artist names is governed by trademark and intellectual property laws and isn't something streaming platforms decide." End quote.
And since I don't have copyright over my own name, it's just another release out there.
So you would have to copyright your own name. Is that something you could do?
I never tried it. Maybe I should be the artist formerly known as Mats Eilertsen or something.
Few musicians can make a living from streaming royalties alone. Live performances are still the mainstay for people like Mats. He argues that this is also what the art is all about, a meeting between real people.
For us performing musicians, that's the most valuable asset now. With humans meeting each other in conversations or in a concert hall or in a cafe or in a pub, AI is here to stay, and it has a good positive sides, can create a lot of good things, but as humans we still have to meet each other and have a smile and chats, and that's still our strength, I think. And live music is still that side, and I think that's our strength in the future.
Lars Bavanger, DW, Oslo.
Should you wish to listen to more of Mats Eilertsen's music, we will be linking to his Bandcamp page in our show notes. Our final story this week is about a village trying to get itself removed from UNESCO's list of World Heritage Sites. And yes, you heard that correctly, removed. Why though? Rob Cameron travelled to the little village of Vukulinec, hidden in the mountains of central Slovakia, to find out.
The steady tap of chisel against wood echoes through a house in a village lane, a timeless scene that attracts a steady stream of tourists. It's a fitting soundtrack for Vukul-Linets, a mountain village where traditional crafts are still practiced, mostly for the benefit of tourists, among rows of centuries-old wooden houses. But behind the postcard image lies an ongoing quarrel over the village's future. Anton Sabucha has spent his entire life here.
Before all this UNESCO frenzy began, life here was much quieter. People had their own rhythm of life. They weren't constantly interrupted by tourists. And when a photographer, an artist or a writer came here, they came with humility and behaved respectfully. They weren't pushy or rude.
Sitting beneath an awning outside his home, Anton leafed through an old history of the village while his wife served homemade pastries. He pointed to a photograph of himself as a boy, surrounded by neighbours. Around 200 people once lived here. Today, only 17 remain year-round.
For the average tourist, they're just wooden houses. For us, they're people. We know exactly who lived in every house.
UNESCO didn't create tourism here. Vukul-Linets had already been a protected folk reserve during the communist era. But after joining the World Heritage List in 1993, visitor numbers exploded. Today, around 100,000 people visit every year. Many are welcome, says Anton. Others ignore signs asking them not to photograph private homes or wander into gardens. Recent international headlines suggested the village wanted to leave UNESCO, but the reality is more nuanced. Anton's campaign appears to be supported by only a handful of residents. But while calls to leave UNESCO are a minority view, frustration over tourism is much more widely shared. Local officials insist they're listening. Miro Parobek is in charge of tourism for the town of Ružomberok, which administers Vukul-Linets as one of its municipal districts. Parobek and his colleagues insist the answer isn't abandoning UNESCO, but managing tourism better. Large festivals have already been replaced by smaller cultural events. The town is seeking Norwegian funding for a new park and ride below the village, as well as restoration of traditional terraces and converting the old school into a community centre. The tourists I spoke to knew nothing of the controversy, but many understood why residents might become weary of living here. They also felt Vukul-Linets was unusual precisely because, unlike many open-air museums, people still call it home. UNESCO has removed sites from its World Heritage List only 3 times because they lost the outstanding universal value for which they'd been recognised. There's never been a case of a community simply asking to leave. The real challenge isn't preserving the houses, it's preserving a way of life for the people who still live inside them. For DW, this is Rob Cameron in Vukul-Linets, Slovakia.
And with that, we have reached the end of the show. This programme was produced by Laura Kabelka and me, Kate Laycock. Our sound engineer was Gianluca Wald, with a cameo performance by Farid Sufranatra. Inside Europe comes to you from DW in Bonn.